Welcome back, everyone.
Yes, welcome back. We are now in springtime, almost officially.
You can't tell in Vegas.
That's true. You can't tell. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about the juicy topic of boundaries.
And you might say to yourself, ladies, you've already talked about boundaries. Why are you bringing it up again?
Because they're fucking important. They're important. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to swear at you, but boundaries are super important.
They are. And I think when we talked about it last time, we came at it from the lens of basically, I don't even know how I would frame that. You framed it so well, but while we were off air, how would you frame it?
Well, when we were talking about boundaries before, it's really about, we set a line, and this is the line that we expect everybody in the world to understand. This is our boundary. These are our lines, and this is how you have to be in order to interact with us. But you had some recent information that kind of shifted that position for you.
Yes. So again, goddamn TikTok. All right. So I was on TikTok just minding my own business like I normally do. And I came across this account. Account is Domestic Blisters. Her name is Casey Davis. Anyway, she's a therapist and she specializes specifically in boundaries. And so she was talking about how when you're doing boundary work, it's really has to do only with your behavior. And I feel like when we were talking about this before, I was really addressing other people's behavior. Well, if they do this, they're crossing my boundary. And she says that shift is wrong because when you're telling someone, don't talk to me that way, it's not a boundary, it's a request. It's not a boundary, it's a request. And that sentence really stood out for me. And she says, rather than saying that, what you need to be doing is like, I won't or will not remain in conversations with people that talk to me that way. She's like, that is a boundary. And that shift has to go from basically blaming others. It's kind of what I was, to what are my actions? What am I holding myself accountable to? How am I showing up in this experience, in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, what it really sounds like to me is you're going from, hey, this is an external boundary outside of myself, to, hey, these are my internal boundaries. This is something about me. And so I just remember, when I was mad about going to a marketing meeting, like it wasn't because of the marketing meeting. It was because I had said, I don't want to be doing things this late because I want to be able to spend, the evening, at least the evening time, the small time that Matt and I have during the week together. I want to spend it with him. And here I was in a damn marketing meeting that I had zero desire to be in. I was mad about it. But when we're looking at it through this lens, I was mad because, again, I'd crossed my own boundary, not because I'd let others cross my boundary.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think I sent you the TikTok, but when I saw that TikTok, it reminded me of the conversation I had with my mother. And if listeners, you might remember, I talked about this conversation I had with my mother where she kept asking me to do something around the house. I think it was to hang her curtain. And I said, I'll do it when I get back from my dad's house because I was planning a trip to my dad and I had a lot of anxiety just around that. And she kept asking me. And within a 15-minute span, I think she had asked me like 5 separate times and I exploded. And at first I was proud of myself. I was like, you know what? I told her, I was like, I firmly said no. And she kept asking and asking. And so when I exploded, I didn't even feel bad because I was like, she crossed my boundary. Like I said no and she crossed it. But really what it was that I continued to engage in that conversation because eventually I relented and I was like, fine, I'll just go to your house and I'll hang up the curtain. She's like, well, no, never mind. And it's like, I was mad. I was really, really mad. And it was because I pushed myself further than I had wanted to. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's very easy for us, I think, to deflect blame and accountability. And if we're talking about living an empowered life, I think looking at boundary work through this lens allows us to take ownership of it because it's not about them. I can't control anything about them, their actions, their behavior, their feelings, their emotions. I can only control me and what I'm willing to tolerate and accept.
Yeah, and I think as you're speaking, what came to mind to me was, that request, that's just kind of showing somebody the line because they may not know where it is with you, right? And so for me, it's one of these things that happens with Matt and lawyer jokes where I'll be like, okay, that's enough. Like, because I'm over it at some point. And then if he continues to go down that path, that's when I'm starting to get mad. And I think that reframing it this way of, hey, the first thing is, hey, here's the line. I'm telling you where the line is. If you continue to want to engage in this space and I continue to be here and allow it, then yeah, I'm the one that's getting mad because like I've already said, no, that's enough. So instead what I can do is I can say, okay, that's the line. You're continuing to push this. Since you still want to be in lawyer jokes, I'm going to go upstairs. Mm-hmm. I can remove myself from the situation in a way to protect myself because I'm serious about like the fact that I'm over those fucking jokes. Like the first one's funny, but like the fifth or sixth one, like, and you keep prodding, I'm like, no, I'm good, bro. Like, cut it off.
I like that it's almost like a both and, which in appreciative inquiry, we use a lot of both and. Anything can be, nothing has to be. And so I like that you still can incorporate the request, don't talk to me that way. Mm-hmm. And I think establishing that line, because you're right, a lot of people aren't going to know what that line is. But once you've made it very clear and there is no ambiguity. Thank you. Ambiguity. There's no ambiguity that, when that person then continues to cross that line, it almost removes that guilt that I would normally feel about making a person feel bad by just walking away from the situation. Mm-hmm. Because I would feel bad about leaving, but it's like, I've made myself perfectly clear, and the fact that you are crossing that boundary shows not how you feel towards me, but you must not respect what I've just said. So I'm just going to respect myself enough to walk away.
Well, you're either not respecting or you just don't think I'm serious. And I think that for me is usually the one that comes up. It's like, actually, when I said I'm over it, and you're not taking that serious. So now I have to take a bigger action that's more to protect myself. And then be like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I'll stop. But like for him, it ends up being this overreaction. It's like, fine, I'll never say another lawyer joke ever again. I'm like, that's like not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like right now, like, keep playing,
see where it gets you, bro.
Yeah. You want some of this? Let's go. But it really is. I think it's incumbent on us to let people know where our lines are, because they're not mind readers, right? Nobody's going to know. Like, actually, I don't like it when you touch me. You have to say something, not just assume that this person is going to know that you're not someone who likes physical touch. Mm-hmm. You have to at least let them have that. And part of what you're doing is you're engaging in a way that allows other people to modify their behavior. And if they're still not modifying, then it's still incumbent on you to protect your boundary. If it means that much to you, is this the hill you want to die on? Great. If it's not, you let it go, but then you know that you've made a choice to not enforce that boundary.
Well, and I think that prior to us starting to record this episode, I kind of just drew two boxes. And in one box, I wrote others. And in the second box, I wrote me. And I feel like the first way of going about setting a boundary, when we, at least initially, when we were talking about boundaries in a previous episode, is like, okay, well, you crossed that boundary. So I was like putting others in a box, right? And if you cross that boundary, if you try to get outside of that, that's where I'm drawing the line. That's where I'm going to be really upset because it's all about you. But really, I feel like shifting this frame, it's putting me in the box, right? And I feel like if someone tries to enter my box, I'm like closed myself in. No, you can't treat me that way. Like, I have control of me. I have control of that space within the box. And I feel like I have, I know that that's like kind of a really weird visualization, but for me, I'm like, okay, rather than encase others, because again, I can't control their actions, but I can control my space and my energy in that space.
Well, and maybe instead of a box, like the image that came to me was more of like, you're in your own bubble. Right. And so, but it's like a flexible bubble, right? Like there's certain parts where it's going to ebb and flow and like, okay, maybe I do give a little bit more here, but then it bounces out again and you kind of figure it out because, every person that you're going to interact with has a different type of permission with you, right? If we're walking into your house and Vince walks by and like, gives you a smack on the butt, he's got permission to do that. A stranger outside does not have permission to do that. Right? Like
you would hope so.
You would hope so. Right. Yeah. But like that's why I'm thinking about it as something a little bit more fluid and less rigid than a box, because you're not necessarily changing it's who you're interacting with that changes based on the type of permission that they have with you.
No, I do like the fact that, I mean, I say box, but I do imagine just like in anything in life, I think it's fluid. I think we evolve and change as people. And I think that also goes with our boundaries, especially if we're doing a lot of healing work and growth. And when you're talking about your situation with Matt in terms of like these lawyer jokes and how, you know, like, okay, like I'm not saying you can't ever tell a lawyer joke again in your entire life, but rather just not now. And I think that the more that you are consistent with it, the more like your requests are taken more seriously. Because I feel like if you're consistent with, you know, stating something or stating your request, and if that person crosses it, if you are consistent with walking away or living into your boundaries, that person will be like, okay, well, she means what she says. When she says no more, like it really means no more. And I think that over time it becomes not learned behavior, but they know how to interact with you, because you do teach people how to treat you.
You do. You absolutely do. What's coming to mind when you're talking about that is I've had instances with my family where it's like, oh, we can't talk about that around Cydia because she doesn't like it. And then it becomes like them kind of poking fun of it. And it's like, yeah, maybe I don't like you being racist, like openly racist in front of me. Like, yeah, don't do that. Like, is that a bad request? Like, I don't think it's bad, but they're trying to make it, they're trying to minimize it almost. And so sometimes Matt will have that instance of like, oh, well, I guess I can't make a joke here because you'll be too sensitive about it. It's like, no, I'm not being sensitive. Just, you know, make your joke once, but don't try to like make it 5 or 6 times in a row.
Well, I had something similar happen with my family, as listeners, as you all know. Like I had daddy issues for a very long time, and I'm the only one in my family that still talks to my father. But anytime my siblings would get together, including my mother, they would talk about my father. I was like, hey, like, can you just like not talk about him while I'm here? Y'all can like, you know, bash him without me, but I just don't want to be in that space when y'all are doing it. And my mother would be like, oh, well, you know, we can't talk about your dad because, you know, Melissa's here, and she gets all upset. And it's like, was that comment necessary?
No.
And it wasn't necessary. But again, it's like when you start to establish boundaries, you're going to get some pushback.
You absolutely are going to get pushback. And part of that is because they don't know how to operate in this space. Like, you know, I'm not asking for anything. You don't need to bring it up every single time we all get together of don't talk about dad in front of me. Like, I'm asking for you to not talk shit about somebody who I love still in front of me. Like, that's not a inherently bad request. You don't like it. Okay, well, you know, don't invite me over. I don't know.
Well, I just remember in the past when I was thinking about, you know, or starting to explore what boundary work looked like for me, I would spend days or weeks mulling over how I was going to verbalize this boundary that I wanted to set. And I think I've even sent you text messages, be like, what do you think of this? Like, does this sound too mean? And it was because I was so worried about making that other person feel uncomfortable, regardless of the fact that I felt not incomplete, but I felt like scarred or hurt. Like, so regardless of my feelings, again, it might be that people pleaser, but I definitely, you know, would spend more time considering their feelings than I did my own. And it's just so unhealthy.
Yeah. And I think really when you're looking at boundary work, you're looking at, sorry, I still have a car brain right now. You're looking at, how do I want this relationship to be? So I don't even think boundaries are necessarily like this bad thing where people get, you know, that people should get so upset about. It's like, hey, I'm doing this so that we can continue to be in relationship with one another. And if you want to have access to me, this is how we're going to do this. It's setting up the rules of engagement with you, because the other alternative, which we've talked about before, is cutting people off. And so when I first started going to therapy, one of the things that I realized is that I had very strict, we'll call them boundaries, but it was like a complete separation with my parents, where they did not know what was going on in my life. I separated as much from them as possible. And it's funny because whenever I go to Central America, they're like, wow, you guys live in the same city, that you guys must see each other all the time. It's like, I see them maybe once a quarter, which still is true right now, but that's, you know, because that's kind of the pattern we've gotten into. But I will say, I have invited them to go out later this month to a show because I was at a silent auction, and y'all know I love me a silent auction. Send me all the invites. Uh, so we were at the silent auction, and there was an artist that was like, "Oh, this was a really good show." My parents had taken me a couple years ago, and Matt didn't go to the show with us because his folks were in town. And he's like, "No, you go with your folks." And it was so good, and I was like, "Oh my, Matt would have actually really liked this show." So the same artist was coming, and I thought, "Oh well, great! It's tickets for 4. Like, let's go together." And here I am, like inviting them to do something because I want to, as opposed to, you know, feeling obligated to do it. It's coming from a different place. It's just these rules of engagement of how we're going to interact with each other, because I could continue to have that wall and jack shit about anything, and barely know my address. Or I can start allowing things in a certain way and just kind of knowing, hey, if these boundaries are going to be flexible, it's going to allow us to actually have a relationship.
I really like that, because I know in a previous episode we also talked about disengaged families, which I think is what you had said your family kind of mostly identifies as. And so I think having this boundary work allows you to move from that side of the spectrum a little bit closer to the middle, which is a healthier relationship with your family.
Yeah. And I think that's really what the boundaries are. And so if you're having people in your life being like, "Oh, you're setting up too many boundaries," or they're getting, protective, or like, "Why are you setting a boundary against me?" It's like, this is about us actually having a better relationship.
I really like that reframe. I care enough about you, about us, about our friendship, about our relationship, that I want to make this work. I want to put in the work to where we're both showing up authentically. And I think that that's what boundaries do. Because when I was showing up for other people, I'm only showing you a portion of myself, because I feel like I can't be my full self.
Right.
But allowing, or at least establishing, vocalizing, and living into these boundaries allows us both to, come and interact in this relationship authentically and get the most out of this relationship. And what a nice reframe that is, because I really didn't think about it in the sense that I care enough, or I care so much about you, not even just about myself, but care enough about you, that I would like to continue this relationship. And in order for that relationship to continue to flourish, we need these things to happen.
Yeah. And I think that looking at that point of view of this is that relationship, there are going to be people who don't like it. And I'm like, well, this doesn't benefit me, or I don't like this way of being, whatever. Okay, well, then we don't have to be in relationship with each other. And so instead of kicking people out of your life, they're just going to leave because they're not going to want to engage. But like one of the things that I have with my folks, which I know you have something similar, is I am trying not to talk about my siblings with my parents. So if my mom wants to know information, if she wants to know how my nieces are doing, you need to engage in your own relationship with my brothers. I'm not going to be the one feeding you information. I may say, she'll ask like, "Oh, have you seen Francisco and Luna recently?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're good." And that's it. Like, I'm not going to engage in talking about that relationship, because that relationship is my relationship with them. And that's a boundary that I've set up. And I think she's kind of picked up on it, because she'll ask, but she won't go into like all of the things, because it's like, if you want to have a relationship with my siblings, go have a relationship. I'm not going to be the third wheel. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let you triangulate me in here. And that one's a little bit of a hard one, because I feel like my dad's trying to do that a bit more as we're having our own relationship. But that's a whole other thing that I'm still working through. But just knowing, hey, here's how we want to engage. You want to have lunch with me, Mom? Great. We can have lunch. We can talk about things that are going on with us. But I'm not going to sit here and give you a full rundown of, oh, my brother told me this. Oh, my brother's doing this and this and that. Like, go find out for yourself.
Well, and just coming back to this reframe of boundary work being only pertaining to you, really had me thinking about the interaction that I had with my mother, because I really did point the finger at her and was upset with her. I think I called you, I was fuming. I called Vince, I was fuming. But really, when I think about it, I even replayed my own actions, again, coming through this new lens, and I see where I went wrong, or I see where I could have done better. And so this has been a really great reframe, and I'm using it as a learning opportunity as I continue to kind of chisel out what those boundaries look like for me.
Dear audience, I just want to point out the amazing thing that Melissa just did. So Melissa went ahead and replayed this from this other lens. And what she did was she actually created new neural pathways in her brain of how she would like to interact with her mother in the future. And it would be from this lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something that we all can do. And she just did it naturally because she's fucking amazing.
Yeah,
so
I am.
Just imagine a hair flip here because I'm definitely doing it. But it's just something that I recently learned, but you just modeled it. Like you go back, you learn the thing. You're like, okay, how would I like to have acted in this situation? And it sounded like it would have been maybe empathy for yourself. Like, man, you know what? That was a boundary that I was crossing. And looking at yourself internally as opposed to all of the finger pointing that went on. And so next time something like that happens, because you've created this neural pathway, you will now have that option come more naturally to you.
Absolutely. And I think that if our listeners are wondering like, well, what sort of questions did I ask myself when I was reflecting? I always ask myself 2 questions, and it was 2 questions that I've learned just, I don't know, being in the field of appreciative inquiry, because my boss would ask me this all the time, because people make mistakes, right? The interaction that I had with my mom, it wasn't a mistake. I see it as a learning opportunity, because I do want to have healthy relationship with my mother, and that includes setting boundaries. And I'm sure she'll, want to set boundaries with me, but it's like, what did you learn? And how would you do it differently next time? And I've replayed that, and I've reflected on it, and I've come up with the answers so that if I'm ever in that situation again, I will take that learning and how I would have done it differently and apply it to this new scenario. That's it for this episode. Find Pivotal Moments HQ on Instagram and TikTok for all the BTS and sister-like banter you know and love. We want to thank our music director, Ron Johnson. This has been a Pug Productions podcast.